Welcome back into the Bangtan universe wormhole. This video is part of a series exploring the gorgeous but notoriously confusing Wings era. But we need to explore it because Wings is part of the BU, and in fact it tells stories about the characters that you won't find anywhere else. You might need some help to understand them, but that's why I'm here. My name is Kieran, and I'm a former English teacher with specialized knowledge of art, mythology, and theology, so I can guide you through the Wings era. In this video, we'll be looking at V's short film Stigma. You only need to know one thing before we get started: the overall storyline of the BU. If you're new to the Bangtan universe, then you really need to watch this video before you try to understand Wings. And now, since you're still watching, I'm going to assume you are up to date on the BU, so we'll get on with it. The novel Demian has a huge influence on the Wings era, and even though you don't need to read it, you need to understand its major points. I've summarized them on this slide, so if you're brand new to the series, or if you just need a refresher on the novel, please pause this video to read what I've written. Otherwise, you can skip on to the next section, which is titled Abraxas. Abraxas was a pagan deity who represents a very important concept in the Wings era, and since our first glimpse of him is in this short film Stigma, it's time for me to explain what he symbolizes. Abraxas was the supreme deity of the Gnostics. They had a very complicated belief system, which thankfully I don't need to get into because it doesn't affect the BU storyline. The BU only mentions Abraxas, and it only uses him as a concept to explain the major themes of the Wings era. But here's what the Gnostics believed about Abraxas. They saw him as a god of total duality, meaning he ruled over good and evil, creativity and destruction, knowledge and ignorance, and so on. He didn't pass judgment on anything at all. So why would BTS, who have such strong beliefs about right and wrong, include him in the Wings era? Abraxas is a useful symbol for representing the main ideas of Wings. For one thing, good and evil really do exist in all of us, and recognizing that fact is just part of growing up. We saw Jimin reach that point in Lie when he committed what he believed was his first sin, and he was horrified to think that he could be less than totally good. That was the moment he lost his innocence. But there's another reason BTS use Abraxas in the Wings era. This mythological deity accepts both good and evil, but humans don't. We all have to make decisions about what we think is right, what we think is wrong, and what we think falls in a gray area. When we're kids, we very naturally accept what our role models teach us. But as we mature into true individuals, we start to examine our beliefs more carefully. From there, we decide which beliefs we do accept and which beliefs we don't. Almost no one accepts everything they learned as children. Hosik had great role models in the orphanage, the women he called aunties. They treated him like a son and instilled good values in him, so he still holds on to most of what they taught him to believe. But do you think they'd approve of him helping Jimin to disobey his parents and escape from the hospital? Probably not. So Hosik is an example of someone with great role models who still makes his own decisions about right and wrong. Taehyung, on the other hand, has an abusive alcoholic father as his role model, so he eventually learned to reject most of what his father taught him. But both he and Hosik are examples of how a person matures into a true individual. And now let's get into the video. It begins, like all the others, with RM quoting a passage from Demian. This time the quote is, "It was the first fissure in the columns that had upheld my childhood, which every individual must destroy before he can become himself. Such fissures and rents grow together again, heal, and are forgotten. But in the most secret recesses, they continue to live and bleed." Obviously, this quote takes a bit of explaining, but you already know part of the story if you've watched the video for Lie. In that video, I explained that Demian begins with Sinclair lying to impress an older boy. He said he stole apples from a man down the road, but then he felt terrible about it because he had told a lie, and worse still, He'd pretended to commit a crime and then bragged about it. The quote in Stigma tells us what happened next. The older boy blackmailed Sinclair over the theft, and Sinclair trudged home feeling like he'd ruined his whole life. But when his father came in a little later, all he noticed was that Sinclair's boots were wet. That made Sinclair feel superior to his father because he knew something his father didn't. The first fissure in the columns of Sinclair's childhood was realizing his father didn't know everything. Now, with that in mind, look at the whole sentence again. The columns that uphold your childhood are something which every individual must destroy before he can become himself. In other words, you can't become yourself as an individual separate from your parents until you learn that your parents aren't perfect. And we can take it a step further. None of your authority figures and role models are perfect. Once you realize that, you begin to re-examine what they've taught you. Now, that doesn't mean you reject everything. It just means you acknowledge that they might be wrong about some things, and you think about everything more deeply before making your own decisions. So now that you have the background, you know that the image Taehyung is scratching out in the first scene of this video is Abraxas. And since we've only seen him spraying graffiti before, never scratching it out, that makes his actions especially important. So let's think about it, keeping in mind that BTS are using Abraxas as a concept, that the whole world is a mixture of good and bad, and we have to decide for ourselves which things are good and which are bad. Taehyung is trying to get rid of Abraxas because he isn't ready to accept that idea. Now, as we get into his arrest, it'll be helpful for you to know that this scene takes place before he kills his father. The purpose of the short film is to show how he goes from simply accepting his father's abuse to actively calling it evil. So he's doing the same thing as Sinclair did, just on a bigger scale. Sinclair's father was a good man, but Taehyung's definitely is not. As the short film begins, Taehyung is already angry about his father's abuse, and some part of him wants to label it as evil. But he's trying to get Abraxas out of the picture because he doesn't want to think about his father that way. But as you can see, he can't scratch out Abraxas. Eventually, he'll have to take a stand on his father's behavior, and he's right on the edge of doing that now. The costume designers even hint at this with a very clever Easter egg. You've probably heard of the band Nirvana, but unless you are or were a big fan of theirs, you might not recognize the design on Taehyung's t-shirt. It's the cover of their album In Utero, and the term in utero is Latin for in the uterus or in the womb. Now remember that in Jungkook's short film, he was compared to a baby chick who'd just broken out of the egg. Well, in Taehyung's short film, he's compared to a baby child. He's just been born and he's ready to learn. Of course, the wings on this image make the Easter egg even better. Now let's get into the interrogation scene, where we see a huge difference between Taehyung's expression and his actual thoughts. He gives truthful answers to his name and age, keeping his expression neutral. But out of sight under the desk, he can't stop scratching at this bolt, just like he couldn't stop scratching at the Abraxas graffiti. This scratching is a sign that he's trying to repress something, but it's still leaking out. And at this moment, he's repressing thoughts of being scared and alone. We can see that from this scene. Then the detective asks about his parents, and Taehyung's thoughts switch instantly from fear to memories, specifically memories of his father's abuse. But just like with Jungkook, the scene is interrupted by a close-up of Taehyung's eye. In Begin, Jungkook saw a burning piano and thought of Yoongi, his mentor from the HYYH era. Taehyung sees a mother holding her child, and that image relates to two people. The first and most important one is the mentor Taehyung will have in the Wings era, and that's Hosik. Hosik's mother abandoned him at an amusement park, and he still misses her. But Taehyung lost his mother too. She abandoned her whole family when her husband started beating them. And now we reach the 146 timestamp, a special moment in all the short films of the Wings era. In Taehyung's film, it shows us the moment of his collapse, not just physical collapse, but also mental collapse. Until this moment, he's refused to admit the evil in his father's actions, but he can't deny it any longer. That's why when the detective asks him about his parents, he says that he doesn't have anyone like that. He lost his mother several years earlier, and he's finally admitted to himself that his father isn't a father. But there's more. This phone booth relates to Namjoon, who can't be relied on to answer Taehyung's phone calls. We'll get more detail about this phone booth in Namjoon's video. Here, it's just the first image in a sequence showing Taehyung's lack of support. First, we saw the father who beat him rather than loving him, then the mentor who hasn't arrived yet, and the mother who abandoned her family. And we also have Taehyung's current mentor, Namjoon, who doesn't always do a great job. No wonder this sequence ends with Taehyung lying on his back and sobbing, right? He has no one he can depend on. Well, except his sister, and she takes on too much of his burden. But here's a cool little detail. Right after his father takes a pull on his bottle, the detective takes a pull on his water. But Taehyung still turns away because the action reminds him of his father. And in a flash, he goes from denial to accusation. His father is a violent alcoholic brute who has no right to treat his children this way. And only then do we hear anything of the actual song, Stigma. First we hear V sing, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, my sister. It can't be erased even if I hide it and conceal it." These lines reinforce what the short film just showed us. Taehyung can no longer deny or erase the truth about his father, and he also feels terrible for letting his sister take most of the abuse, even though that was her decision, not his. By the way, V also sings, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, my brother," in a different part of the song. And this has confused a lot of armies because in the BU, Taehyung doesn't have a brother. So who is he talking about? Well, I see this song as a dialogue between his BU character and his character's sister. So, "I'm sorry, my brother" is her talking to him. She's been trying to erase and hide their father's abuse, just like Taehyung has, and they're both paying the price for it. It's very important that the white puppy appears at the same moment we hear, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, my sister," because this is when Taehyung acknowledges the truth about his father. Now, white dogs are an important symbol for Taehyung throughout the BU. He's always playing with them, but he can never hold on to them. Take this scene from the BTS Begins VCR, for example. This isn't his dog, so obviously he can't hold on to him. And while you're thinking about that, notice what Taehyung is wearing. Once again, the costumers have come through with an amazing choice. But back to the puppy. You won't believe how much symbolism is packed inside this little animal. In Western cultures, white is traditionally associated with innocence, and that seems to be the puppy's main purpose here. After all, this short film is about Taehyung's loss of innocence, which happens shortly after this, when he kills his father. But back to the puppy itself. Again, white dogs have a different and very interesting meaning in Eastern cultures. In Korea, dogs in general represent loyalty, friendship, and protection. And white dogs are connected to shamanism. They're supposed to be bridges between the living and the dead, and they can also bring the dead back to life. Every bit of that, both the Western and the Eastern symbolism, ties in perfectly with Taehyung's storyline. From a Western perspective, the puppy struggling to escape is a sign that Taehyung is about to lose his innocence. Meanwhile, from an Eastern perspective, the puppy is a sign that the people who should be protecting Taehyung and being loyal to him aren't doing their job. And just like white dogs are connected to shamanism, Taehyung is a bit of a shaman because of his prophetic dreams. Also, his déjà vu shows him how he himself has been brought back from the dead. By now, Taehyung has gone from childlike submission to his father's abuse to legitimate blame for actual criminal behavior. At the same time, Taehyung has realized that the one person who ever protected him, his sister, did more than she should have. That's what he means when he asks, "Why did you do that to me back then?" But I've discovered that the Korean for "to me" can also be translated as "for me." And if you buy my theory that the song Stigma is really a conversation between Taehyung and his sister, then he is asking her why she took the abuse for him. Once you put it all together, it's easier to understand why Taehyung snapped when he did. The arrest we see in this short film might have been his final arrest before he killed his father, because first Hosik got him out of jail, and then Taehyung went straight home, saw his father beating his sister again, and just snapped. Now, of course, this doesn't excuse what Taehyung did, not in the slightest. His crime of murder was much worse than his father's crime of child abuse. So is this the stigma of the title, Taehyung being a murderer? It seems like the obvious answer, but Seokjin undoes the murder with his time traveling. Now, of course, Taehyung's deja vu is so strong that he remembers the murder anyway. In fact, he remembers it happening over and over again. So this could be his stigma, but the problem with this theory is that he doesn't completely trust those memories, so it might not be strong enough to really leave a mark on his soul. Well then, what about the guilt he feels because he let his sister take most of the beatings? He did call himself a coward in the song lyrics, so is that his stigma? I doubt it, because now that he knows his sister took on too much of the hurt, he'll do his best to keep her from doing it any longer. I think his real stigma can be found in this passage from one of the supplementary notes. In this scene, Seokjin is taking his friends to the cottage near the beach. Along the way, Taehyung gets mad at Namjoon over a misunderstanding, and this is how he reacts. Something cold slid down my spine. I felt like the whole world had crumbled with a crash. It felt like floating alone in the middle of the ocean. It was terrible and frightening. I was miserable and insignificant. I was angry. I was so angry I couldn't hold it back. I wanted to cause a scene. I wanted to destroy something, to hit something, to wreck myself. I was always afraid that my father's blood ran in my veins. I thought maybe his violence was my inheritance. It seemed as if something was piercing my tightly wound defenses. It seems like Taehyung's real stigma is being the son of a violent man and fearing that he might become a violent man himself. He does overcome this stigma in the end, in the Love Yourself era, when he meets and takes care of a runaway girl. When she disappears, she leaves him a note telling him it's not his fault. This is a huge weight off Taehyung's shoulders because he always worried that he couldn't take care of anyone. For instance, his own puppy who kept running away. The girl's message proves that he can take care of someone, and that means he isn't like his father. So when he goes home and finds his sister being beaten again, he doesn't react out of anger. Instead, he grabs his father around the waist and holds on tight despite the punches raining down on him. And in his mind, he tells himself, "No, I'm not like my father. I'm going to protect our family," something he couldn't do. And now at the conclusion of the short film, we see Taehyung's symbol appear and join Jungkook and Jimin's symbols on the cover of the Wings album. If you're not sure what Taehyung's symbol represents, let me play it again with the sound on. This is an image of breaking glass. So now we have the symbols for all three magnes, and we're ready to move on to the hyungs. The symbol for each hyung will merge with the symbol of his magne to create something new and more familiar to you. You can probably guess who gets the fourth unused spot on the album cover, all to himself. And now it's your turn. Please drop a comment below to tell us your thoughts on the video. Does my interpretation make sense, or do you have a different one? How about any questions or anything you want me to address in upcoming videos? Finally, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. That helps us to get noticed by the YouTube algorithm, which helps you find our latest content. Apo Bangpo.